So the goal for today's video is to give you a better understanding of training zones. I've been a professional runner for probably the last 10 years, maybe longer. I ran for Ireland in 2006. I went to World Cross Country in Japan. And so it's fair to say I've been around long enough to have a certain understanding of the different training zones. I've ran some incredible, race results and that's awesome. But then I've also put in similar time, you could say, similar mileage, similar effort. But if the ingredients of the training, which is the ingredients of, yes, you ran 10 hours that week, yes, you ran 100 miles that week, but how was it broken up, into those training zones? You'll have heard of things like 80-20. I'm pretty sure you'll have heard of zone 2. And so today I'm hoping to educate you in a way about these training zones. I don't want it to be a fast-paced video. I don't want it to be, that typical YouTube style of video where you're trying to race through topics, fear of losing attention. The purpose of watching this video is because you actually want to know more about running, you want to be better at running, and you're willing to dedicate some time to listen to a bit more of an in-depth discussion on the different training zones. I want to sort of cover, hopefully naturally, what it sort of means to train in sort of each zone, different sort of zone models. I'll sort of talk about how I would break it up for myself, and then where I'm sort of dedicating my attention, if it's zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, etc., etc. Where do I think I'm going to improve by working on that zone? What sort of sessions might I sort of, get stuck into? And how that would then help or improve certain parts of running, right? Then we might naturally sort of get into talking little bits about perhaps what has let me down, where, like I talked about, there's races where I've ran more miles in the build up to other races, but ran 10 minutes difference over the marathon. So instead of running, 209 to 211, I've ran 220 to 221, right? And it's like, well, that doesn't make sense because you trained more, you put in more work, you were out there running more. But it's a ingredient sort of thing, and it's the breakdown of that ingredient. So a really simple way of explaining that would be like you've bought the exact same ingredients that you cooked for a spaghetti bolognese, but the way you've put it together will dictate how it tastes, how much time you spend on each part of the dish. I hope that makes sense. So running's sort of the same. You can have a firm understanding of zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, what they mean, what the scientific terms mean, exactly what's happening in the body from a physiological perspective every time you run within that zone, what bloody heart rate you should be working at to stick in that zone. But if you don't know how much time or why you're dedicating time in that zone, then it doesn't really create a better result. So you should be hoping by the end of this video to be better equipped with knowledge, not just about a certain zone, whether it's zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, etc., etc. You want to know, if someone says to you, why would I run in zone 4? What's the purpose? I want you to understand by the end of this video. I want you to be able to answer that person by the end of this video. But then I also want you to know when you're out there training, maybe what sort of type of training to do to stimulate that area, that zone. But then also I want you to sort of have some idea of, right, well, I worked on zone 3, once or twice last week, so maybe I need to top this area up, etc. And that will change depending on what type of athlete you are, because we are all different types of athletes. It's not just shape and size, even though that is a thing, but it's also like, are you a more power-based athlete? Are you quite fast? Are you quite speedy? Or are you, let's be honest, are you more slow twitch? Are you more of call it a diesel? And then you can be a bit of a hybrid, where you're kind of a bit of both. And I naturally probably fall into that little bit of both category. And so if you've watched my channel for a while now, or you've never watched it before, it kind of doesn't matter. I've often preached about doing like VO2 max reps and how important it is, and how important it is to, push your ceiling higher. And I have a feeling the reason I achieve good results when I've sort of kept my VO2 high isn't just the VO2 side of things, it's also power. So when you're running at VO2, you're likely running at a high power. If you're a speed stroke power based athlete, you need to keep that in a good place. If you're a speed stroke power type athlete, maybe you came from a different sport, maybe you were, into rugby or football or NFL or Gaelic, it doesn't matter, but likely you might have a bit more fast twitch to you. And then it's really important that you maintain that. If you try to move to training like a typical marathoner, out all day trying to get fat utilization in a good place, and you let your sort of like speed and your fast twitch drop, don't then be surprised if you start struggling in races, because your power and your speed, it's not really speed, it's more power. When your power's in a good place, you'll be able to extract more of your fitness out of yourself on race day. And we'll sort of get into that. And that's the breakdown of, depending on what kind of athlete you are, not as simple as fast twitch or slow twitch, but depending on what type of athlete you are, might dictate how much time you spend in a certain zone. And so, not my super quick introduction, I'm trying, I think my role on YouTube is best when I'm trying to educate and help those that are willing to spend the time and listen. Not to rush through videos like some other YouTubers are doing, not necessarily just running. YouTube has this way of making you think you have to rush, but then you're not really educating. You're briefly touching on a subject and then you're moving on. And the way to get better at running is to truly understand what it is you're trying to achieve when you're out there doing it. That's what's going to help you move forward. If you already have a coach, if you already follow a plan, at least when you're out there doing it, you'll have a sense of, why am I doing this? What's the goal? And that'll help you execute it better. Okay, so I guess a good place to start would be zone 1. Rewind that. A good place to start would be, the first question that's going to pop up is, what sort of zone model are we talking about here, right? And the honest answer is I don't know, right? And it's not that I don't know training zones or the specifics, and by the end of this video, you're going to realize I do extremely well. But you've got maybe 3 zone models, you have 5 zone models, you have 7 zone models. And so let me first tap into what sort of zone model, if there is one. I'm probably going to create my own today. I might, I don't really know. So you have zone 1, which is your basic aerobic training. If you're new to running, you might find it difficult to spend time in zone 1. It's the very lower end of, the sort of training system. And for me, you're looking at a heart rate of between 120 to probably 130, or actually anywhere from 110 to 130, especially if I'm on a bike doing some cross training. My heart rate does go right up to probably about 180. So that's a little bit of scale for you. I might not get these specifics exact, but it doesn't matter. If I'm drilling something into you today and I'm telling you that it matters, then it matters. My heart rate and the scale, bar a few beats, it doesn't matter. Don't stress on it. Zone 2 is from my perspective, and what we're going to talk about today is going to be this, fat utilization or your max fat oxidation. It's the big hype on the internet. It probably deserves a lot of the hype, but we're going to talk about that a little bit. And that's when my heart rate's kind of going from probably like 130 to 135, likely to 145 on a safe day. If I push it to 150, I've probably, crossed over. And that's the thing. It's sort of a spectrum. It's a scale, right? But that's your like fat oxidation. We're not into sort of like any type of threshold yet. That's just your max fat oxidation. You're still in a comfortable place. If your physical body's in a good place and everything else is in a good place, and you can handle the pounding and you can keep going at this all day. So long as you're fueling it, then you're able to keep going all day. It's not marathon effort. It's nothing like that. It's just an area of above easy, but it's still comfortable. Zone 3 for, some models would include both of your sort of thresholds. If you're new to running, trying to differentiate your thresholds is going to be very difficult. But for today's topic of conversation, you have LT1 and you have LT2. You have lactate threshold turn point 1 and you have lactate turn point threshold 2. My greatest understanding of both of those would be, for me to tell you how long you can run at both of those would be a mistake. For someone to comment and tell me that I was wrong about how long you could run at those would be a mistake, because we're going to talk about that too, but that's capacity. That's how long can you run at a certain threshold, and everybody's different. Running economy comes into the equation, how efficient you are, how well your body deals with the muscles breaking down, how well your body deals with heat rising. There's a lot going on when it comes to how long you can sustain a certain threshold. Lactate turn point 1 is the first noticeable change in how much fuel you're sort of burning. So when you're doing a test, you run on a treadmill or you run outside, it kind of doesn't matter, and you've been keeping an eye on what's known as lactate, but that's basically telling you how much fuel it's you're burning to, you know, create this speed or create this power. And the lactate turn point 1 is the first shift in okay, now you need to use a bit more fuel to keep running at that pace. And that's your sort of, you know, your first lactate turn point. So that's your first threshold. It can be aerobic threshold, it can be lactate turn point 1. There's all different types of definitions. Steady state, maximal steady state, I think is sort of used for that. And then you've got lactate turn point 2. For a tiny bit of context, lactate turn point 1, possibly you could keep that going for 3 to 4 hours. I don't know for a fact. There's too many variables. I've never tested it. So what's the point in me trying to tell you what you can or cannot do? Lactate turn point 2. Now we've gone from you were pretty good and you were in control to now you're creating more lactate, which again is fine. It's not a concern yet. But the fact that you're creating more lactate is telling you that you're using more carbohydrates for fuel. You don't, you know, run out. The reason you'll slow down when you're sitting at lactate turn point 2 is because you'll run out of fuel, not really the lactate. The lactate's not really what's, you know, making you slow down. What's making you slow down is that you're now burning fuel at a rate that you can't sustain. So what's going to happen is you're going to slow, right? So that's probably, we've got zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, LT1, zone 2, or zone 4, sorry, is LT2, anaerobic threshold, tempo. But be careful with things like that. When you're going to read things on Strava or online, everybody has different definitions of everything. What they call tempo could be, you know, LT1. What they call threshold could be LT2. You know, what they call LT1 might be threshold, and then they call tempo LT2. It's complicated. Different coaches use different terminology. By science, it's your anaerobic threshold, because it's the point just before you start to go anaerobic. Anaerobic is we're using more fuel, we'll not be able to keep this going for long. Zone 4. Personally, zone 5, we're not quite at VO2 max yet, but we're roughly at what I would call, I'm going to say like aerobic power, but it's also probably more like, for me personally, it can be like 10K effort. And so for you, that means it's going to be around about your 30 to 35 minutes sort of effort. And I don't know what race that will correlate to. For me personally, it's 10K effort, but for you, it might not be 10K effort. But it's sort of like, we're not quite at threshold anymore. You know, we're working now, we're focused, we're having to concentrate. If you're not well trained, you're not going to sustain that for 30 to 35 minutes. For serious context, I might struggle at the minute to hold that for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because I haven't put in the work to improve my capacity to run at zone 5 is not in a good place. That is kind of different to fitness. Fitness is this overwhelming, or this, you know, this how much fitness you've got within you. Then you do specific training, which improves capacity to sustain time and zones for a certain length of time. So you can kind of have the beginning of a good result in your fitness already, but you haven't done the capacity training yet to be able to actually run at a high effort for that sort of race distance. And so maybe you're doing a race that takes you 45 minutes. And if you haven't done the capacity training, you're going to have to run at a lower intensity. So your race result won't be great, but it could have been great if you had done the training. And so you have to run at this lower intensity so that you can survive the 45 minutes. But had you done more work in that capacity sort of area, the extension of fitness, then you can race pretty hard for 45 minutes, get a much better race result. The general fitness was there, you hadn't done the work yet in the sort of, from a capacity perspective, which lengthens how long you can run in certain zones. That's zone 5. Zone 6, this is, so it's going to be a 7, pretty much a 7 system model. Now I've got there. Zone 6, we're going to go for VO2 max. And so now we've moved, for me personally, up to sort of 3K to 5K effort. Science, I think, says 8 to 10 minutes. Roughly, you know, obviously I don't run 10 minutes for 5K, but I also used to run 8 minutes or sub 8 minutes for 3K, so it's still in the middle. But don't, if I say 5K effort, it's not necessarily your 5K effort unless you run between 8 minutes for 3K and 14 minutes for 5K. If you run 20 minutes, then it's probably more like your 3K effort, or perhaps even shorter. Now we're into VO2 max. Then the zone above VO2 max, which will be zone 7, we're going to see that as pure power, pure speed. And from an energy perspective, you've actually started to go faster than your energy system can keep up with. And so you're out there sort of sprinting or working at, you know, maybe 1500 meter effort or 1 mile effort or real speed or power or hill reps. And now you're working, I think it's called the lactic system, or that'll be about beyond me in terms of the actual, someone in the comments might know, and I'll say well done, fair play to you. But it's like the lactic system. It's basically that you're out there and you're running at an intensity that your body can't keep up with the energy demand. So there's a huge debt, which is why you can only keep going for, I don't know, maybe like 7 to 10 seconds or something, and then you're done, right? But it still plays a role, and that also stimulates what's known as your neuromuscular system. And we don't necessarily need to get into that today, but neuromuscular system works alongside your fitness. And if your neuromuscular system is in a bad place, you won't be able to extract the best out of yourself on race day. If your neuromuscular system is tired, the best way to think about that is when you've done a race, maybe you've done a 5K or a 10K, and then you go training, it could be your first session after that race, or it could be your second one, and sometimes it really sucks, and often it'll really suck, and it's not that fitness has changed, and it's not necessarily that the muscles are super tired, but your neuromuscular system can be tired. Or if you do weights for the first time in a long time, or if you do some plyometrics, or if you do some hard hill sprints, you might find that neuromuscular system drops a bit, and then you can't get the best out of yourself sort of on race day. Okay, now we'll talk about zone 1. And this is now, this is very easy. This is going to make up, depending on how new you are to running, this is a very enjoyable, it's not that enjoyable. I actually really hate running in zone 1 because it's not even that it's too easy. It's that I don't love my technique when I'm running in sort of zone 1. I don't really love the rhythm that I sort of find. It's just, it can feel a bit like plodding, and so it doesn't feel great, but it's easy from a perspective of you don't really have to try. You don't really have to try psychologically. You don't really have to try, you know, like big focus. You don't really have to think about your technique much. You're just kind of running. You can make up a big chunk of your program with sort of zone 1, especially if you're just getting started in running. You can make a lot of improvements by dedicating more time and volume to zone 1. It's pretty low injury risk. This is where a lot of people will make up volume. If you are quite an injury prone athlete, you can jump into cycling, swimming. There is other forms of cross training, like a cross trainer, elliptical, arc machine, rowing. This is where you're going to spend time. This is the 10-year rule of just dedicating time, putting in a lot of time. And that's, if you take for context that I've been running since probably like the year 2000, what's that, 20 something stupid years, that's a lot of time. I wake up, I might not be that motivated, but I still probably go do 5 miles in the morning, 5 miles that night on a non-motivated day for 20 something years. that adds up to something. That improves efficiency over time. And so efficiency is what you're going to help improve there, and just call it general fitness. As you know, volume can go up, your general fitness will get better and better and better until a certain point. Now that I've been doing this for 25 years, do I get much of a fitness benefit when it comes to my next race by running in zone 1 or biking? Not really. It becomes a trying to cut your losses. So you're still trying to maintain this aerobic side of things that you've built, this efficiency, this really big aerobic engine. But the real benefit of going and doing 40 minutes or maybe 50 or 60 if it's in zone 1, it's not huge. You're trying to maintain what you've built, but it's not really what's going to make the difference on race day. And so that's why I can't brag about, oh, before that Boston Marathon, I ran 100 to 110 mile a week. If a lot of it was zone 1, because I've been doing this for such a long time, it probably didn't do a lot for me. If you're a newbie, it's going to make the world of difference if you add an extra 30-minute run or an extra 40-minute run to what you're doing. A world of difference. Super, super important. Serve your time. That's, in terms of examples, it's just your runs. It's just whether you're doing 5 mile, 3 mile, 10 mile, it's time on feet. For some people, if you are very, very, very new to running, this might be walk, jog. It really might be. It's keeping that heart rate low, keeping the energy that you're using low, and just dedicating time. You might have to jump on a spin bike or a cross trainer, do it super easy to stimulate that zone. Zone 2, you know, now we're into fat oxidation, you know, it deserves the hype. It really does, right? Because I think it's when your body is like super, super efficient. So you're showing it how to be super, super efficient. The difference between a professional or a experienced runner running at zone 2 or being in their zone 2 to a recreational or a newbie is just, that's also light years apart. Because I can run and be in zone 2 but be running at like 540 per mile, 550 per mile, you know, 330 to 340 per kilometer. And so it's still kind of close-ish to race pace, you could say. But not only that, it also requires a pretty sort of big level of focus. So I have to focus. I have to concentrate. I can't just go out there and walk, jog, and stimulate zone 2. So the reason I'm telling you that is because if you're going to do zone 2, I'm saying it's like, I'm not saying it's the holy grail, but I'm saying it's been really useful in some of my best race results. Really, really useful. When I'm spending time in that sort of zone 2, I do become super efficient. And that efficiency crosses over into some of the zones above what you're doing, right? But the other big benefit I think I get from zone 2 is that attention. That like, I'm out there for maybe 1 hour and I'm sort of having to focus for that 1 hour mentally. I'm having to sort of concentrate. I'm dialed in. If you're struggling to keep your heart rate below, you know, 145 or 140, and you're struggling to stay in your zone 2, you're going to be mentally frustrated, not mentally dialed in and focused. If I lose that sort of mental concentration or that focus, I slip out of zone 2 back into zone 1. I don't think if you're new to running, that's what you're going to struggle with. That if you don't stay focused and you don't stay engaged, that you're going to fall out of zone 2. You're probably the opposite. You're like, shit, if I focus at all or if I concentrate at all, I'm going into bloody zone 3. So that's something to pay attention to. I don't know how you sort of, you know, get that benefit, that sort of concentration. You'll work on it on other days. But if you're listening to this zone 2 being all the hype, it is really, really important, but I think part of that level of importance when it comes to the professional side of it is that you're spending more time per week in a focused state. And mental focus and concentration when it comes to big race results is super important. Super, super important. So that is something to sort of bear in mind. Examples of zone 2, when I've raced really well, I've honestly spent 3-4 hours a week in that sort of zone 2 area. that's made up of anywhere from 8 to sort of 12-mile runs, or at least 8 mile of the Sunday run before maybe it got a bit quicker. So that is quite a chunk of time in that zone 2. But if we've got like, you can see already how much of the week is made up of zone 1 and zone 2, like a huge chunk of it. But that, I think they sort of say 45 minutes minimum, and that's 45 minutes without creeping into a higher zone, or you've kind of, you've wasted that zone needs a good 45 minutes of being stimulated. My best piece of advice is, if you're really struggling to keep that heart rate down, then you're going to have to run, walk a bit, run, walk a bit, or you're going to have to do your zone 2 like an interval session. And you're just going to have to do 9 times 5 minutes, take a bit of recovery, and then you can run a bit quicker. Honestly, I don't care if you do 45 minutes and you do 1 minute efforts, 30 seconds rest, 1 minute effort, 30 seconds rest. Still only do 45 minutes total. And that whole time you'll have kept your heart rate in zone 2, and you'll have ran quicker than you otherwise would have if you were just doing, there's no rules here. You're just spending 45 minutes keeping your heart rate in that sort of, whatever it is, 10 to 15 zone. And by doing it, breaking it up into little reps, minute reps, 90-second reps, 2-minute reps, you're going to get to run quicker. It's going to be more fun. And then you don't have to like plod and try to get the heart rate to come down. Zone 3, I don't like zone 3. That's really interesting that that's what came to my mind. I really don't think I improve much spending time in zone 3. I'm not about to tell you that it's not important. I just have tried so many times to just dedicate chunks of time in this sort of zone 3 area, this LT1, and I've done it, and then I've got to sort of like the end of a month or the end of 6-week block, and I've done all this time and dedicated 3K reps, 4K reps, and all this sort of stuff, and nothing has really moved forward. That could be because I'm more of a speed stroke power type marathoner, if that's what you want to say. I don't know. But don't let me turn you away from thinking it's not important. It might really work for you. And that's what's so important about this conversation, is that remember that what works for me might not work for you, and what doesn't work for me might really work for you. But zone 3 is when you're still in a pretty good place. When you're running, I was doing a little bit of training this morning, for example, in sort of zone 3 at the beginning of the session. And then I was lifting it to zone 4, 3K reps, 2K in zone 2, and then 1K, zone 3 or zone 4. And you have to think to yourself, do I still have a couple more gears? That's the way I look at it. So I'm sort of running along, and I know the sort of heart rate that's going to keep it where it needs to be. But I'm also thinking from a not just a heart rate, which might be a interior. I don't know what the terminology would be, but I'm trying to think for myself, not just using gadgets to tell me am I still in a zone. And the thought process for yourself is, can I still increase this effort? Can I still increase this pace? And if I can't do that almost 2-3 times, then I'm not in zone 3. And that's the danger a lot of people are going to have, is they're going to think they're in zone 3. Zone 3, I'm talking about doing 2K and then lifting it for 1K. Zone 3, I could have kept going this morning for 60, 90 minutes, And if I couldn't, I'm not in zone 3. Now, you might not always be able to do that, because some days you're going to be a bit tired. Again, we talked about capacity. You might not have trained it, but it really shouldn't be putting you under pressure. My heart rate in that zone 3 is between probably 55 to 162, 63. You'll notice the heart rates are becoming more specific, and that's because once you drift over one of these heartbeats, you really do move into a new zone. It's quite temperamental now that we're getting towards the sort of higher zones. Zone 3, how to stimulate that. Again, a bit like zone 2. Zone 2 improves the whole spectrum. It's beautiful. Zone 3, you're starting to really get into improving efficiency in terms of using lactate as energy, right? everybody thinks of lactic acid as like this bad thing. It's a bad thing if you're not well trained. The better trained you get, your body can actually convert lactate into energy. And so you create lactate in your system, your body then converts as much of it as it can into energy, and then that helps you run faster, right? The part that shows up in your blood is the lactate that your body wasn't capable of converting into energy. That's now waste product. Lactate in your system would hypothetically be a lot higher than what's showing up in your blood. When you get very well trained, your body can produce heaps of lactate in the system, but you're like think of a train, probably a train firing coal, or I don't know what the hell it would be, coal into the burners. All this lactate's being thrown into the burners, it's being converted into energy, and then there's a waste product. Hold on. So lactate isn't this terrible thing. Zone 3, you're very, very, very efficient still. The problem is that you're not really producing much lactate. Remember I told you it's still your lactate turn point 1, so you're still not really, the energy demand isn't sort of that high yet. So you're not really creating much lactate in the system to give the body work to do to teach itself to be really efficient. LT1, you can do anything from, I know the Ingebrigtsens have made it really famous, like the 5 times 2K, but you can really do anything from 5 times 2K to 3 times 20 minutes. To when you're training for a marathon, you could probably do 3 to 4 times 30 minutes, dare I say it. It's as long as you've built it up, as long as you've done like, your first session is 30 minutes total, your next one's 45, your next one's 60, you can really build it up to, if you're in the right zone, if you're in the right intensity, if you're not making a mess of that, you're not getting too hot, your muscles aren't breaking down too much, you will be able to sustain this for a lengthy period of time. Zone 4, now we're moving into probably the absolute most important zone in running. Both from this is where you're going to get the biggest benefits, the most probably like bang for your buck, but also the faster you can get your zone 4, your lactate threshold, the faster you can get that lactate turn point to be, the better an athlete you will be across every event. Not, if you've just seen in the trail running world lately, there's an athlete, I think just won Leadville 100, and he, I think, is now proven how important it is even for long trail events, like long trail events. So this is the most important probably system to work, and one of the most important to improve and get it to a good place to help your running move forward. Now, if you're new to running, even in zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, you're improving zone 4. It's that simple. You don't even have to run in it to improve it. Like, you just need to, even probably if you went for a bike ride, you'd improve your LT4. Or not LT4, zone 4. But the more time and the better it gets, the more time you spend running, training, and the better your zone 4 gets, well, it becomes more difficult over time to, make it better. That's fair, right? And so this is where I get a lot of benefit, is spending time in zone 4, which is that anaerobic threshold. It's roughly the pace I can handle for 1 hour, which usually means when you see these top level athletes, normally if they're pretty quick over half marathon, they'll also be pretty quick over 10K. They're probably not half bad over 5K, and they can go on and run a really great marathon. So you can see the correlation. That's like in the professional world, it's kind of better yard half marathon. Hypothetically, the better you're probably going to be at 10K and even marathon. Very, very important. So the zone 4, this is because you can only handle it on race day if you're well trained for an hour, then it's likely in training, most people are only doing 30 to 40 minutes, not heaps more. You can do some of these reps, broken into reps, or you can do it as a single, call it like threshold run. people do it different ways. You can, a lot of people combine zone 3 and zone 4. It is like a spectrum, you could say, and it is a range. And so you can do like up and down tempos where you're doing, maybe it's 45 minutes and you're doing 5 minutes in zone 3, 5 minutes zone 4, 5 minutes zone 3, 5 minutes zone 4. Then you can, obviously, if you're going to train for a half marathon or something like that, you might look at doing 3 sets of 15 minutes all in zone 4, right? And you're really now moving to that capacity part of it. Not just how fast am I when I'm running in zone 4, how long can I sustain it for, which becomes important also. So you can improve pace of zone 4, but you also want to improve capacity of zone 4. You know, how long can you sustain it for? You're not spending a great chunk of time per week. If you're doing, I'm doing 10 hours a week and I'm going to spend 45 sort of to 60 minutes maximum in zone 4, you know, it's 10% of the week. But it's a 10% of a week that should absolutely exist every single week. You should be doing zone 4 every single week of your training. It is that important. This is where you're still very efficient, right? Because your body's still utilizing that lactate really well. It's moving at a quicker pace. You're still super, super efficient, but you're trying to push this sort of system a little bit because you're not at sort of zone 3 anymore. You're not totally in control, so you're a little bit sort of out of control. That's where you're really driving the body to learn to be more efficient at faster paces. Learn to be more efficient at turning the lactate, the energy, into useful power and pace moving forward. This is definitely the most important zone that you should be focusing your time and your training in. But remember, from the percentage perspective, 10% of the week, not more than that, but it should absolutely exist every single week. And it's probably the area that's going to improve all the other race results. Absolutely every single one of them. You'll notice as it gets quicker, so will your other race results. There'll be a direct correlation every time. So I hope I've done a good job until now. Now we're moving into zone 5. Zone 5, we are now looking at, like I said, this is kind of like aerobic power. When it comes to, at the very beginning, I talked about capacity. Once you move into zone 5 and even VO2 max, and the VO2 max is slightly different because we're trying to push our ceiling higher, but this is if you're probably training for, any race like 5K, for example, and you're going to take 20 minutes or close to that. Now we're into sort of like zone 5. For me personally, if I haven't worked on my zone 5, what starts to happen is I push threshold to, it's difficult to talk about zone 5 without talking about VO2 max, but zone 5 and zone 6 are, now we're going to combine them because it's going to make it easier to talk about, even though they're different, because I told you the difference in timing. So but now that we've moved above threshold, they become similar in conversation, and so it's better to combine them. If all you're doing is zone 1 to zone 4, you will become very limited. If you're new to running, will you get better by just focusing on zone 1 to zone 4? Definitely, absolutely. But will you reach a point that you're no longer able to progress? Yes, because your ceiling is going to be limited. When I start to put time and effort into zone 5 and zone 6, and I'm pushing beyond threshold, zone 5 and zone 6 still absolutely improve your pace at LT4 and LT2 and LT1, zone 4 and zone 3. Why? Look, this is where I'm not a data nerd. It could well be that by improving your maximum pace that you can run for 8 to 10 minutes or even 30 minutes, well, of course that's going to move forward what you can run for 60 minutes. If you don't work on your zone 5 and zone 6, and you don't improve how quick and how hard you can push mentally, physically, aerobically, anaerobically, etc., doesn't matter what's contributing to you now being capable of running quicker for 30 minutes or quicker for 10 minutes. If you can go out the door and you go run as hard as you can for 10 minutes and you can now cover a further distance than you could before, then it's very likely that your zone just before that is also going to improve. Now, that could be because of something physiological that has changed. It could be that your new maximum effort that you can push for 10 minutes has made running at this sort of like zone before that a lot easier psychologically, so you can go a little bit quicker. I don't know all the answers to why that gets better. I know for a fact if I only dedicate time to LT1 or from, sort of zone 1 to zone 4, I get stale. And suddenly if 2-3 weeks have gone by and the hardest you've pushed is zone 4, well, that's your new maximum. That's all your body knows. That's all your brain knows. And so then you're like, okay, well, today I'm going to go do 5 times 3 minutes, and I'm going to run, I'm going to start in zone 5, and then I'm going to move up to zone 6. So I'm going to start at like kind of my 30-minute sort of effort, and then I'm going to move up to my 8 to 10-minute effort. Well, if the hardest thing you've done in the last 3 weeks is zone 3 and zone 4 and zone 1 and zone 2, you're going to find that a nightmare. And I probably would guess that your body physiologically is going to really struggle with that also. So it's not just going to be a psychological thing, it's also going to be a physiological thing and what's happening on the inside. Because you've moved sort of out of control when it comes to how much fuel you're burning and how much energy you have in your system, well, that's why you can't sustain these efforts for as long as your sort of thresholds. But it's still important when it comes to 5K PBs, 10K PBs, and even the marathon. Trust me when I tell you, this is still so connected to the marathon, because the higher your ceiling is, if your ceiling is like the top of a pyramid, right? And everything then filters below, and you've got right at the very top, call it our zone 7, and then you've got 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The higher you push that ceiling, of course, then the quicker the race results and the sort of systems beneath can also be. And so if you run a marathon in between zone 3 and zone 4, or in zone 3, the better you have zone 4, 5, 6, 7, the better you have zone 5, the better zone 4 can be. The better zone 4 is, the better zone 3 is going to be. So it's still super, super important. But now you're really down to minimal time in terms of dedication. Now we're starting to also move into what category of athlete you fall into. If you are quite powerful, you are quite fast, if you go do a session in zone 5 or zone 6, you are going to get a big benefit, like a huge benefit, but it's also not going to take as much out of you as if you're an athlete that's perhaps more slow twitch. You will also, I'm not saying slow twitch runners or less powerful runners, you haven't came from a speed background, you might fancy yourself as more of a diesel, you can keep going all day. For you to then push into sort of zone 5 or 6, you have to be careful, because the genetic makeup doesn't lend itself as well to doing power type training. So you're going to suffer for it, you're going to be sore from it, and then it's going to impact the rest of your training. So this is important. Keep an eye on this stuff. So when it comes to zone 5, zone 6, you're really looking at maybe one session every 10 days, and you're looking at 10 to 15 minutes worth of work, not huge quantities of work. Another brilliant way to do it is to throw, either you can do like maybe 5 times 4 minutes in zone 4, you've done your sort of threshold bit, and then you could do 5 times 2 minutes at the end, in between that sort of zone 5 and zone 6. And take full recovery, 90 seconds, 2 minutes rest. It really demands pretty lengthy recovery. So you can chunk it in with other sessions, but bulk the session out, as in get the threshold bit done first. Don't throw a lot of fatigue and lactate into your system and then think you can go back to threshold. Get the sort of easier zone done first, and then you can go into sort of the, the zone 5, zone 6. Very, very important. So super, super important to raise that ceiling as high as you can. The higher that ceiling is, probably the better, potential you have as an athlete overall. But sort of be careful in those zones. Really do be careful. Zone 7, this is, even if it doesn't exist, it does in my world. I think it does. It definitely does in my world, because that's when I'm, doing strides, really fast strides once a week. Maybe I'm doing really, quick, hopefully quick. They might not be quick the first few weeks, but quick hill sprints. It's you're working at a power or an intensity that isn't really relevant to any of the sort of races that you're going to run. But again, think of it as, I think a really good thing for people to pay attention to at the end of a week would be over a 20 to 30 second period, or you could go as low as 10 to 20. What sort of speed, or if you use power in your training, I use a stride foot pod, and I don't do this, but I bloody should. What is my like highest power, over this period of training or this week for that 10 to 20 seconds? And if it's bloody zone 4 threshold, you need to work on that. You really do. And that's what a lot of people are going to find. Because you don't, at the end of the week on Strava, it just says mileage, right? It doesn't tell you, your 10-second max power. And if it did, you'd probably start paying attention to it. So if you're doing some fast strides or you're doing some, hill sprints, you're trying to improve right from 10 seconds. Zone 7, we are talking about literally 5 to 10 seconds. Then when we're talking zone 5, zone 6 a second ago, really at the end of that week or month or block of training, you want to be looking at like, have I improved my sort of like 2-minute power, my 5-minute power? And you can also think of these as speed. And by improving those, you are definitely going to see a return when it comes to your other zones. If you can go and run for 3 minutes, and because you've dedicated time to this and effort and you've worked on stuff, and you can run at, I don't know, let's pretend it's 3 minutes per kilometer. You can now run for, 1 minute at 3 minutes per kilometer. And your personal best before used to be 3 minutes 30 or 4 minutes. Of course, you're going to find paces below that easier, more sustainable, and not only that, more efficient and just more comfortable aerobically, what energy you're using, etc. It's super important, but you have to tread really carefully when it comes to anything probably above zone 4. So how you fit this in, you could add on a Monday night some hill sprints, probably start with 5 to 10 seconds. You want to be doing, probably 3 to 4 of those and then a really slow walk back. And then you could add in maybe twice a week where you do that sort of twice a week. And keep an eye on pace or power. But that's all I've got for you. Be smart with how you balance all this training. And I really do hope you found today useful. And that's all your zones. I have the Jogging Room website with plans and the masterclass, heaps of tips. I also have joggingclo.com or 262clo.com with running gear. But like, subscribe, do all those lovely things, and take care.